I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-Black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, a podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm Dean Detloff, and I am your amateur Marxist economist this week.
And I'm Matt Bernico, just the guy buying up all your commodities.
I am extremely qualified. I've been listening to hours and hours of David Harvey podcasts while I do the dishes in this quarantine. You might say I'm just extremely good at geography now.
You know where all of the cities are, all of the states.
Yeah, I don't know where all the states are on a map, but I know where they are in relation to capital.
Right. They're written on your heart.
Yeah, exactly. This week on the Magnificast, all of this will be put to just great use because we are taking a look at the world around us and making a desperate plea to just please be a real-life socialist. Wouldn't you know it? We're doing it again. We're making the appeal once more, the altar call to Marxist socialism. Low-wage workers are having to choose between their health and their family's health and a paycheck. That's going on right now. The U.S. is launching some coups in South America, as usual again, and we're getting close to the first ever single person owning $1 trillion, Jeff Bezos himself. At the moment, things
Jeff
are...
Bezos.
Exactly. More like Jeff Bezos. At the moment, things are super bleak, but some find some ways around actually dealing with politics, let alone socialism at all, which seems difficult, but I can imagine it just probably 10 years ago in my own life. So this week, we are going to take a look at the rhetorical strategies that certain liberal Christians use to get around the pressing political realities. It's kind of a follow-up to what we talked about last week. And we've done a little bit of this on the show in the past, but I think that it's always helpful to just kind of review some basics when it comes to Marxism, and that's what we're going to do this time around.
Yeah, so a few months back, you may remember, we did an arc of episodes on evangelicalism, and one of them we paid some special attention to, progressive evangelicalism or liberal evangelicalism, or I don't know, however you want to parse that out. We ended up talking about Jim Wallace and Brian Zond a little bit, and I think we said some things about Shane Claiborne as well, even though he's a little bit different than the other two. But in that episode, we talked about how these more progressive-y types of evangelical Christians try to construct a type of third way politics that, on the one hand, give lip service to social justice-y kinds of Christianity, but really lack actual political substance, right? You should care about the poor, they might say, but don't throw a brick through anyone's window. Don't have a major political revolution. Don't push for even minor reforms, right? That's kind of what we're up against, I think, with some of these liberal Christian types.
Which, to be fair, you shouldn't just throw a brick through a window, but you should know why you should or shouldn't.
That's right. You should have a really solid... I mean, if you're going to throw a brick through a window, you should have a really solid reason. And that reason should be the overthrow of capital.
Exactly.
But, don't just do it because you feel like it, I guess. Listen, I'm not here to tell you what you do.
It's the Marxist reply to anarchism, once again. Sorry to report.
Yeah, that's right. That is right. Well, in that episode that we were just talking about, one of the examples that we came up to was Brian Zond's position of being neither right or left and just being a Jesus guy. And since we're kind of riff on some of these ideas again and talk about maybe the larger like rhetorical structure of like what's going on there, I thought we could kind of revisit Brian Zahn's position, and that'll kind of like set the tone for the rest of the conversation we'll have. So whether you like it or not, here's Brian Zahn. Okay. Brian says, they could only see us versus them. Republicans versus Democrats, elephants versus donkeys. They were incredulous about my claim to only be interested in following the Lamb. Yes, I learned the hard way that if the kingdom of Christ is not perceived as a viable alternative society, then competition for conventional political power seems the only option for influencing the world. So Zahn's rhetoric here is like representative of a pretty common way that I think like progressive-y types of evangelicals think and talk about politics, or avoid talking about politics, maybe more precisely. It's like a really attractive kind of thing because saying both sides are wrong and that Jesus is right just like appeals deeply to that evangelical desire for a pure theology and a pure politics, right? You're not going to get your hands dirty with like having to be, behind a certain type of legislation or behind a big social movement. You don't have to worry about those types of things. But the problem is that like disavowing the left and the right leaves you in a place that is not only like above politics, but also pushes you to like disavow political struggle altogether. It creates a kind of like shell for you to live in sort of like a weird prefigurative way, but not even in like a radical prefigurative way. just a I'm gonna go to church and not do anything kind of way.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth pulling out. Some of these people have like more or less, or better or worse, activist dimensions to their faith, right? Like Jim Wallace, I don't know. He's a typical liberal, and like all typical liberals, sometimes he's got a good idea or is like on the right path, or he, gets something right, but other times kind of misidentifies the problem. Brian Zahn is maybe a unique case, not in terms of the discourse, but just in terms of how this all cashes out, because I couldn't tell you what Brian Zahn does or doesn't support. Maybe just that was my own fault because I don't follow him really, but it's not obvious. What is obvious is that, like Matt, you were just saying, Jesus provides the grounds to kind of think that you're outside of the political fray, and then that gets painted as the radical position, or more radical than the radicals, right? And of course, the reality underneath that aesthetic, the truth behind the art, if you will, is that capitalism doesn't really care if you do or don't go to church. So I think it's important to say here that to lay this out, to suggest what we're going to suggest, which is that Christians should be Marxists, and that Marxism is a specific way of thinking about politics and economics, etc., that Christians should get into. It's not just a matter of being like, oh, this is right, and those liberal Christians, they're dumb. That's not, I think maybe sometimes our tone lends itself to that, which is too bad. It's a character flaw, I think, in myself, but nevertheless, the real point is that if you want to be a Christian who really does care about why people are poor or impoverished, or why there's poverty or wealth disparities, etc., the kind of rhetoric that says Jesus is above the fray isn't going to help you solve that problem. You might be able to feed a lot of mouths at a soup kitchen, which is very good and important, but at the end of the day, you're not going to be able, you don't have the tools available to you to sort of parse out why that is. It's not just because people sin, or because, there are some egoistic people in the White House or something. Maybe that's part of it. But at the end of the day, what's really going on here are some material practices and processes that you can actually point to and identify. And Marxism is a way of doing that. It's a set of analytical tools or stories that help us understand what's going on.
That's what we're doing in this episode. We're going to try to dig into this trope in Christian writing that tries to develop a Christian politics that opts for, I'll go for the character flaw. The character flaw here. People who are trying to develop Christian politics that opts for Christian-y platitudes over actual politics. You can find this kind of stuff all over. We pulled out a few examples. One that's kind of a piece of popular writing, and one that's more academic-y. But I think the same sort of rhetorical trope is present in both. That it'll be kind of interesting. So yeah, we'll outline some of those articles, and then we'll turn to why Marxism is actually a helpful tool for Christians to think about politics. So the first article we're going to talk about is an article I was tweeting about the other day. It was written kind of a weird place. ABC's religion and ethics sort of section of their website.
The Australian one, not the American one.
That's right. This is the Down Under one. I don't know exactly why that is the case, but it's the case. Anyways, the article is called "Must Christians Be Anti-Capitalists? If so, how?" So first of all, with a title like that, it's an article I'm going to read. But the other thing is that it's written by two people who I know and like for the most part, and yeah, so it's people I know, and I'm going to definitely read it. Unfortunately, I think that they've got it all wrong here, and I want to say how. Okay, so the article itself is like pretty analytic when it comes to its philosophical style. And when I say pretty, I mean extremely. Like you'll find like arguments labeled, and it can be kind of tricky to read if you're not really used to reading that type of thing. But basically, they do make this whole big case about whether Christians should or shouldn't be anti-capitalists, and I don't know, fair enough. They kind of come to a conclusion that like, yeah, they should be anti-capitalists, but in a really specific way. And first of all, I think it's cool. Like we agree that like Christians should be anti-capitalists for sure, which is I think more than can be said than for some other folks on the sort of progressive Christian end who wouldn't even go that far. But the part that I think is really troubling, or at least it kind of obfuscates what anti-capitalism might mean or do, or like how it could help us in society, is the section that's titled "Witnessing to a Different Economy." So I think that the last section here is important because it basically tells you, well, kind of confusingly, why they reject more like revolutionary or even reformist positions and what they opt for instead. So the entire article, it does spend some time talking about revolution, but not really why it's undesirable, or it doesn't really it just it kind of just says that it is. It gestures that it is undesirable, and that's not great as an article. But the end is kind of the most interesting point because it kind of tells you what they want to do instead, and I think it's I don't know, very confusing. So I'll just read this kind of introductory paragraph to the conclusion, and we can kind of draw out what's going on here. So they say this: we propose the following 4 economic postures to mitigate against the sinister power of contemporary neoliberal capitalism. A capitalism whose animating features are captured in the descriptions above. Our idea is that these postures adhere to the teachings of Jesus, participate in God's shalom, and take sin seriously without requiring economic revolution. God's shalom is the thing they talk about earlier in the article. Anyways, so they think that they've isolated or located a handful of things or like political ideas in Jesus that can help us through dealing with capitalism. I guess the first kind of complicated part here is like, who are they prescribing these to? Like just individual people or churches or all Christians? It's I'm not exactly sure, but either way, with that question up in the air, you already have considerable political problems. Anyway, so the the ideas that they think are really important to mitigating against capitalism's sinister power are, first, sharing in a way appropriate to you and your community. So you should share the things that you have. Okay. Number 2 is treat money as a tool, not a treasure. So this is good, right? You don't want to worship mammon. You want to worship God instead. They have a few like biblical sort of references here that kind of give support to this idea. I'm not going to bother with their biblical support because like I think if you listen to this podcast for a bit, it's pretty clear. Or if just crack open the Bible yourself, and these ideas kind of come out of the Gospels, I think, in some different ways. The third one is give sacrificially, and then finally serve God, not wealth. It says, don't fool yourself that wealth isn't a threat to holiness. You can't serve God in wealth, Jesus says. That's true. I agree with that. And in light of these like sort of practices, they offer up this different alternative, the economy of God's kingdom. I'm going to read one little bit of a longer piece here, and then we can kind of talk about what's going on here, Dean. So bear with me if you're tired of hearing me talk. The economy of God's kingdom. Our discussion of the various capitalisms and common anti-capitalist arguments has aimed to present a picture of modern American capitalism and some Christian concerns in the face of it. We are convinced Christians must critically engage conventional ways of commerce, consumption, and participation in our current economy, but admit we are not sufficiently gripped by movements of reform or revolution. Neither reform or revolution is a rough spot to be in.
Yeah, yikes.
Our hope is that by practicing the above-mentioned Christian postures, we participate in and witness to an economy that challenges capitalism and any other economy not shaped by the way of Jesus. We suspect faithfulness may not be the overthrow of the system. I don't know why you'd think that. The goal and gift of those postures is that by embodying them and others, our list is not comprehensive. That's a good way to hedge your bet as an academic, by the way. We may become a people whose life together displays God's shalom as we love our neighbors as well. I think that when you read this, it is actually really hard to be like, okay, when you read this and you're not like a hard Marxist or whatever, it's hard to find like a lot of things to disagree with, because like it kind of sounds nice, right? Like people should serve God, not wealth. You should give sacrificially. You should treat money as a tool, not like as the main thing in your life. You should learn how to share with people, and all those things sound really nice. But I think the part that makes me like feel so weird, I mean, it's first of all, like, who are you telling to do these things to? How are you telling them to do them? But how exactly they are a challenge to capitalism is a huge question I have, because people are already doing these things, and I haven't seen capitalism challenged, not even once. Not by them, at least. So I don't know. I guess I think that this kind of fits into the larger rhetorical trope, though, that we were talking about earlier, right? This is a way to really like talk about Christianity and politics in a way that, I mean, on the surface sounds faithful, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really tell you anything about politics. It doesn't tell you anything about, you know, how much should people be paid minimum, right? Like, who should own the means of production? I don't know. Does sharing in their view mean like sharing Jeff Bezos's wealth? I don't know. And the troubling thing of writing with this particular like rhetorical mode is that like the point is to not tell you, it seems. You know, the vagueness is part of it. Because if you were to, then you wouldn't be doing the economy of God's kingdom anymore, and you'd be doing politics as such. So I guess what's troubling in this way of speaking is that, like, in trying to talk about being faithful, what you do is set up a way to make sure you never do politics. And that is bad. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Yeah, no, I think it's all we lay out. Of course, I agree 100%. You're right about everything, et cetera, et cetera. But one thing that I think is kind of strange is in that conclusion, the idea is that, right, they're critical of capitalism insofar as it's an economy that isn't shaped by what they call the way of Jesus, which true, like you say. But what would such an economy be is not clear. Certainly, like, you know, sharing in a way that's appropriate to a community, treating money as a tool, all these kinds of things, those aren't economies. Those are things that you can do within an economy, but you can obviously also do them better or worse in certain economies. Some economies lend better to serving God and not wealth than others, for instance. You know, all of these kinds of questions are left totally unanswered or even unraised. And I think that question that you ask about to whom are these things directed is the right one, right? Because if you're just talking to Christians, well, at the end of the day, Christians are not going to create an alternative economy. And certainly they're not going to create an alternative economy that really challenges capitalism in a meaningful way. They might be able to create an economy that guards your soul in such a way that you feel sort of removed, you know, like you can think of maybe certain experiments in Christian commune living, or I don't know, it's bad to idealize things like Amish life for certain Mennonite communities, but
or even like intentional communities, right? Like that's
right.
Like a similar sort of vibe.
Right. And sure, like it's true that insulates you in some ways from certain complicities, but what you've basically done is retreated. You've left, you know, the mountains of injustice that occur in the world totally unscathed. And capitalism doesn't mind if you retreat. It will always find a way to bring you back in anyway, somehow. So I think that is especially the problem with these kinds of things. By presuming that there is an economy that is based on the way of Jesus and never articulating what kind of economies might seem more or less related to that kind of Christian way of life, whatever you think it might be, you end up inadvertently sort of endorsing the way that things already are. They're all incidentally bad, so there's no point in really thinking that hard about them.
Yeah, it seems that way. Man, the part that really does irk me too is that neither reform or revolution is like, well, like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. That almost, it just seems like, I don't want to say nihilism because like clearly there are values, but like it's certain that like you don't want to be bothered with larger political questions.
Mm-hmm.
It's bizarre because like you know they do go out of their way to say things about capitalism and how it's bad, right? And
Mm-hmm.
if you can see those things, if you have that type of critical perspective of understanding that like there are things within capitalism that aren't good for people to live, then like why wouldn't you try to do anything, right? Like to be
Mm-hmm.
against to not be gripped by movements of reform or revolution, and to do nothing is like to do nothing but like to do this other God's economy of God's kingdom is just like I don't know. It seems like just I guess capitalism won't care. Is all I'm trying to say is that you know you can do
Yeah.
this, but it won't make a difference to capitalism, and in turn it won't make a difference to people who work really low wage jobs. It won't make a difference to Black communities who are plagued by environmental racism. It won't make any difference to people who are in prison and who like you know might not ever get out unless like significant reform movements or revolutionary movements succeed. So I don't know, like I guess if you aren't gripped by those movements, I would suggest reconsidering everything.
Yeah, I completely agree, right? And that just that sort of final line of not suspecting or being suspecting that faithfulness may not be the overthrow of the system, it's just hard to swallow, right? Because it's like, well, surely I don't understand how if you think about supply chains, right? The way that commodities get to us, the way that our food is produced and gets to us, all that kind of thing. Surely you could never be faithful to Jesus Christ if in any, you know, kind of meaningful sense if you don't disrupt those kinds of things, right? Like eating a banana that relies on like the brutal exploitation and literal murder of like farmers in Colombia, that cannot be a Christian practice. Or at least like if it is, it's an evil Christian practice. It's a Christianity that I think should be destroyed, right? And in any case, that idea about faithfulness is a strange kind of thing to bring up if you want to talk about living in capitalism.
Yeah. I imagine like the response to this might just be that like, well, Christians should like, you know, have this whole other type of way of living in response, but like how?
Good
You know,
luck.
like I think the other part of this too is that you can say this is neither reform or revolution, but say like through some kind of like magical thing that happens, right? Christians all of a sudden were like, yes, I am convicted by this thing particularly. I will be an anti-capitalist and I will share with my community and I will use money as a tool and all of these things, right? And like how will those Christians like gain the political power to accomplish these goals even, you know, even amongst their own communities?
Mhm.
Or why would they even like especially since so many Christians are like willfully against doing them. I don't know, it's just like it seems like a lot of wishful thinking too when it comes to the like the sort of Christian virtues that are
Yeah.
espoused here.
Yeah, I think that's also a problem with something like Christian supremacy that happens here. But I think that an easier way to talk about it will actually be to bring in this other article, and that will move us along so we can get to our real Lord and Savior Karl Marx. The title of this essay that we're going to talk about is called "Only Jesus Saves: Toward a Theopolitical Ontology of Judgment." A lot of words in there that you don't have to worry about them. But it's by a guy named Daniel M. Bell Jr., and it's in an extremely 2005 book called Theology and the Political. Don't get it. Like, don't bother getting the book. It's one that I have because I went to a weird school. But Anyway, the essay is good insofar as it actually crystallizes this very bad opinion. And I'm going to read a paragraph from it that will help us draw some out. So Bell writes this. I should say this paragraph is the end of like a long discussion of the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze and desire and all that kind of stuff. Again, don't worry about all that. But anyway, for your interest. Okay, Bell says this. The only way to defeat capitalism is to embrace the gift given in Christ, which is nothing less than the superabundance of grace that repositions our lives within the aneconomic order of love. So repositioned, redeemed by love, we are enabled to give ourselves, to enact true sacrifices without loss or end, even in the face of an economy that would eclipse gift and plenitude through the imposition of a regime of scarcity, debt, and dominion. Christ's sacrifice defeats capitalism as that sacrifice, and every true sacrifice that flows from it opens a way for desire to be healed of its economic distortions and renewed in the mode of donation of perpetual generosity. Capitalism is overcome as human relations are redeemed from the agony of competition and dominion and revived as the joyous conviviality of love that is the fruit of the proliferation of non-proprietary, that is, participatory relations. Capitalism is defeated as fear is cast out, the fear of my neighbor that compels me to possess more tightly and acquire more compulsively, the fear that in giving I can only lose, the fear that death and the cross is the end of every sacrifice. And in light of all these kind of conceptual changes or different ways we can understand ourselves and what Christ does, etc., Bell goes on to propose the works of mercy, which is a tradition in the Catholic Church in particular, but it shows up elsewhere, that enumerates several different things like almsgiving, and there's a bunch of them, different works of mercy. But those are what Bell says are the sort of tangible forms of combating capitalism because they kind of naturally flow out of these maybe theological ideas or theological effects, however strongly you want to put it. I bring this up, this particular article, because it crystallizes, like I said, this point that's really common, which is that the story of Jesus and Christianity and also the actual work that Jesus does in dying on the cross is supposed to be the thing that ultimately saves us from capitalism at the end. That's the claim that Bell is making. It might not seem that way, maybe it doesn't look that way, but make no mistake, that's what happened. That's how it is. That's Bell's argument. It's this really kind of strong, almost fideistic claim, right? That it's the you could say it's like the name it and claim it version of academic theology, right? You say that it exists and therefore it does, and you go out and get it. I think that what's dangerous about this is it's very similar to everything we just said, right? It distracts you from politics. It posits Jesus Christ as this kind of thing that really supersends or transcends politics. It's maybe like a more sophisticated version of Brian Zahnd in many respects. But the other thing that I think is really dangerous about it is that it reinscribes this Christian hegemony, Christian supremacism, right? The only way to defeat capitalism is to be a Christian. There's no Muslim way of defeating capitalism, for instance, right? There's no way to be a good Jew and hate capitalism. These are all things that are precluded unless you kind of accidentally stumble your way into like the mode of Christianity or something. But that's a dangerous thing to say, right? That ends up being a supersessionist claim in itself. And I think, so not only are there political dangers here, but there are real theological violences that get reinscribed in these kinds of proposals. I take it these are often opaque to these authors, but sometimes they're not. You know, people like John Milbank will just own that yes, it's a Christian supremacist narrative, and why shouldn't it be? Because Christianity is simply right, and therefore capitalism is bad, and Christianity is the way to get rid of it. Woefully naive. Also, Slavoj Žižek, for all his faults, once described Milbank's vision as a soft fascist vision in the book Monstrosity of Christ, which is like the only quote I remember in that entire book, because it is true. So anyway, I just pull that out as one other example of maybe like a high academic level of making this very basic sort of point, but one that's nevertheless very pervasive.
Yeah, I think that's it's a helpful thing. We got both ends of the spectrum here. We got this analytical piece, we got this weird continental thing going on here, and they both have some considerable problems, just like we've said. I mean, just like, okay, I always want to give people, especially people that I know, the benefit of the doubt, and like, you know, I think as like, barring the weird thoughts about reform and revolution, and some of the willful thinking or the wishful thinking there. As a person, like as a way to comport yourself in the world personally, I think some of these ideas are fine, but like they don't they don't have a politics to them, and I think unless you kind of deal with the political end of things outright, you're going to end up doing more harm than good to yourself.
Yeah, I think that's right. There is a a danger to your soul in the attempt to save it in this paradoxical way. I think that's true. Um, I maybe this is a good way. We don't have to spend too much time on this Bell article. I mean, we've probably said enough that sort of just crosses with the other essay as well. But in turning to Marxism specifically, I think that this might be a good time to say there are actually two uses for Marxism for Christians. One is what we introduced the episode with, namely, it's a way of analyzing the world around you. It provides these tools. If you can get a good handle on those tools, you can understand what's really happening and you can intervene. You can do something about it in a meaningful way. The other, though, I think, is that Marxism actually does encourage you to chasten a certain Christian naivete that can become even worse than naivete, can become a dangerous supremacism, right? Because once you understand how capitalism works, you can't say bizarre things like only becoming a Christian will save you from capitalism. You have to, you might say that being a Christian might help you do that or something, or, whatever, however else you want to add on to that, that's fine. But you're going to have to start talking about a lot of other things like labor and capital before you ever get to that side of it. And frankly, I don't think that you should. Anyway, a conversation for another time. But maybe we should just turn to Marx. How does that sound? Can I just force us there?
Yeah, I think so.
All right, I've seized the means of this conversation. Yeah. All right, so we're gonna we'll break the second half of the episode into three pieces. So one is going to be basically what is capitalism in a Marxist framework, and how does it work, or how does capital flow, let's say, in that system. The second will be what is labor power, which is kind of the bottom side response to that. So if capital works a certain way, then labor also works in a certain way. And then lastly, we'll talk about what those two things, if you understand that, what they can help you do or what they can give you in terms of parameters for deciding what to do about it. So maybe, Matt, I'll just introduce a few themes on capital, and we can go forward. So, first of all, Marx spent a lot of time thinking through how capital works. There's lots of things Marx contributes, but this is both the probably most boring stuff to read, but also the most important. It's the stuff that all Marxists like to make jokes about. You get to learn how much linen costs in 18th century England. You can learn all about how to make coats. You can learn a lot if you read the book Capital about how commodities work, how money works, all that kind of stuff. It's very dry. But again, it's extremely important. The biggest lesson, I think, from Marxism that is hard for us to get our heads around, is that capitalism isn't just a thing out in the world. It's not something you can point to and say, that's capitalism. You can't even point to one definition and say, this is how capitalism always is. David Harvey, who I mentioned earlier, I've been listening to a lot. He likes to talk about capitalism being value in motion, which is to say it's an economic system that's based on relationships. It's not a fixed thing. And you have to figure out how all those relationships work together. So when it comes to Christianity, I think why this makes a difference is if you want to talk about the least of these, let's say, that becomes more than just religious language. You can figure out, first of all, who the least of these really is, who that refers to, but even more importantly, why they really are the least of these, right? People don't just show up and they're born into this category that Christianity valorizes. There's a way of kind of reading Jesus' statements about caring for the poor as an indictment on a system that makes them poor. And that means we should figure out how that system operates.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. We can talk a little bit more about value in motion and what capitalism is and how capital works. It is complicated, and I'm glad you're gonna talk about that, not me. But I think that the reason that Christians should care about this is really important, right? Um, if you're like us, one of these social justice Christian types that care about people and want to make the world better for them and call out all types of oppression when you see them, you have to know how capitalism works. And why it's doing the things that it does, and what to expect from it, right? And just we were kind of saying, you can't just hope to share with people in your community out of capitalism or something, right? It's not going to work because of these larger like machinations of the way capital functions within like this like macroeconomic sense. So yeah, I don't know, if you care about people and you want like just not just people in your community, but like everyone everywhere to be lifted out of like economic oppression, then this is an idea that you might find interesting.
I hope so. I'm going to do my best to make it interesting. All right. Like Matt gestured toward, I'm going to take the capital side of this equation. Matt's going to take the labor side. Matt, if you want to make a great joke, please feel free. You can lighten the mood. But let me lead us through some of the boring ways that capital works, but also in a hopefully sort of simple way. I should start out maybe saying a little bit about why it's hard for Christians to understand this bit. I think it's because when Christians talk about capitalism, if they're willing to recognize that it's bad, what they are usually saying is not that capitalism is bad. They're saying that something like greed is bad, or they're saying something like wealth inequality is bad. And that's true. Both of those things are bad. But those are not the sum total of capitalism, or they're not what capitalism amounts to. They're what capitalism enables. They're the symptoms of how political economy in capitalism operates. Right? This is the driving basic thesis through the two essays we even just talked about. The first one being capitalism is basically a sort of series of vices, and the key is to be virtuous. You want to trade those vices for virtue, and that'll sort it all out. The second is capitalism gives you a bunch of bad desires. So if you just become a Christian, you'll have the right desires, and again, everything will fall in line, right? The trouble is that capitalism isn't those things. It involves those things, but there's more to it. So let me talk a little bit about how capital works in these specific ways that Marx talks about. And once again, I'm just going to point people to David Harvey. He's not the only person who talks about this. There's lots of good economists who popularize this stuff, but Harvey's just one of the best if you really want to dig into it. All right, so borrowing a little bit from him and also from Marx's book Capital, at least volume 1, the only one I've read. Essentially, capitalism is about circulation, which means you can tell a story about how capital moves around. So here's the story that Marx tells. There's a lot going on in the background, but this is the basics. Okay, first, let's say it's a new day, and a capitalist really wants to make some money, to invest. What happens? So a capitalist starts out with some money. How that capitalist got money can be a number of different ways, right? Maybe they inherited it. Maybe they've already had a bunch of successful ventures, so they've just got money. Maybe they went to the bank and got a loan. But however they got it, a capitalist has money. A capitalist takes that money into a market and buys commodities. That's what they need. So those commodities are things like the means of production. So by way of just creating an example, let's say this capitalist is going to become just a huge Bible mogul. They're going to print tons of Bibles, create a Bible market. So one of the commodities in that market this capitalist is going to have to buy is a printing press for Bibles, right? And they'll have to buy paper, and they'll have to pay for translators, all this kind of stuff. But a capitalist doesn't want to do all the work that you have to do to print a Bible themselves. So the capitalist has to buy labor, which is also a commodity, right? Okay, that's a very important piece of capitalism. You go into a market, you buy all kinds of tangible stuff, how to build actual physical things in the world, but you've also got to buy people's labor so that they can do it for you, right? And not everybody has money, so people are motivated to sell their labor. Okay. Let's move to the next phase of the story. The Bible factory starts pumping out Bibles, all right? The capitalists did successfully buy the press, bought all the materials, bought the labor. They've got a Bible factory, and it is just, cramming out every study Bible you can imagine. These Bibles are new commodities that are produced with the power of the commodities the capitalists bought, right? Again, those commodities being just boring things like printing presses and labor, etc. Those commodities, these new Bibles, go to a market where they can get sold for a profit. That profit then gets redistributed in a number of different ways. So workers get some of it as wages, right? They're entitled to a little bit of that profit. Maybe the Bible factory has to pay a distributor to get the Bibles to the market in the first place. So that distributor gets some profit. Maybe the capitalist has to rent the land for the factory or pay interest on a loan that gave the money in the first place, right? There's lots of different ways that this profit has to get split. But at the end, after all that splitting, all the extra profit goes into the pocket of the capitalist as money, and that money can be put back into the market to buy commodities, to make new stuff, and the process starts all over again. All right, that's like a ton of words, but the process is pretty simple, right? A capitalist has money, they get commodities so that they can make commodities, they sell those new commodities, and then the money ends up going back into the process. I'm going to take a break there. Does that all make sense, Matt? Do you want to unpack any of that?
No, I think it makes a lot of sense. That's just the way it works in all of the big resource management games that I've ever played. That's how it works. In Civ 6, that's how it works in City Skylines. You gotta get the commodities, you gotta get labor power, and if the labor power you have, if those people, if they're not happy, gonna work slower. That's the thing about them in video games.
That's true. You got to spend money to make money, as they say. I can tell you're already chomping in the bit to get to the labor question, so let me fill out a little bit more of this, and I'll turn it right over to you. Okay, why does all this matter? Why does this story about capitalism matter? Well, the first thing is you can already maybe see some of the contradictions involved, and Matt pointed to one, right? Who gets to distribute the profit? Who gets to decide what something costs? Who gets to decide what wages are kind of reasonably paid in a factory or some other kind of workplace? Those kinds of questions all create these points of tension in that process of capitalist production. So, like Matt said, if laborers think they're not getting enough wages, if the profit's not coming back to them, and they feel that they can have a coordinated activity to stop that, to break that part of the labor or the capitalist process, then that's some leverage. If a capitalist has trouble buying up the means of production, that's a problem. If the capitalists can't get their commodities to market, that's a problem, right? There's all kinds of places in this story where things can go wrong, and that is a big problem for capitalists. But things get weirder when you start talking about how all these capitalists have to compete with each other to win in the market. So, here's our Bible capitalist. He's selling Bibles like hotcakes, but all of a sudden there's a new Bible maker in town, and these two Bible makers are going to compete to see who can sell the most Bibles, right? And that means they have to find ways of cutting costs anywhere that they can, right? And this is a fundamental feature of capitalism. Capitalists have to compete with one another, and that competition forces all the rest of the pieces of those processes to become more complicated, and also, again, to claw back all the profit that they can so they can continue to reinvest. So by the time you get to the level of, say, a national capitalist class, right, all the capitalist interests in the United States, let's say, at that level, you've got whole countries competing with other countries and exploiting poorer countries by making them do shitty labor for no money, right? This is the story of offshoring. You can move an automotive factory to Mexico because you know that you can pay Mexican workers much less money than you have to pay unionized workers in Detroit, let's say. So, of course, you're going to do that. It gives you a competitive edge. If you can convince the national power brokers and political leaders to let you do that, then you have to, because it gives you the edge that you need. What this means is if you can figure out the different points in these systems, it leads you to lots of other questions about how do people get compelled to sell their labor? How do people make sure that they get what they need to pay things like rent and what they need to subsist? And that is how you get to, I think, the question of who are the least of these. How do they become that way? It's not just greed or vice, although it is that, right? You have to be a very greedy person to become the biggest Bible magnate that you can. But you also have to do all these extremely discernible, obvious things. You have to participate in these specific mechanisms, or else you're never going to get off the ground. All right, that's the capital side of the story. Maybe we could just pause for a minute and talk perhaps a bit more about how that helps us think about capital as Christians.
Right. I think it's really helpful to parse it out like that too, because when you frame things as like, just vices, right, or greed or whatever, it takes some of the like mechanistic qualities of the system away. Like, it makes it seem like, well, if the CEO or whoever of the CEO of big Bible company was just like nicer to his workers or something, it would be different and it wouldn't be so bad. But that's not the case, right? The whole thing here, when we map it out like this, we can see that like the whole point of this is to make one person richer so he can compete and like win out inevitably with the the other person in the market. And like by doing so, like he has to make his or hers want to be want to be right, get it right here, his or her employees, it has to make them poorer, because like you can't do anything but that, right? That's the only way this works, is if one person, if one person can be more successful off of a bunch of other people who are becoming, like less and less successful, I guess, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right. Another kind of piece of this is that capital always has to expand, right? You can only make so much money because, I don't know, let's say everybody gets a Bible and there's no more people who need them or something, whatever. It's a bad example, but you can kind of understand maybe the principle I'm getting at. It's a bad example because we'll always need more Bibles. Anyway, what I mean is there's a certain kind of threshold of profit where profit gets harder and harder to make. And what that means is capitalists have to find new ways of making profit, and that forces the system to grow and grow and grow until you have someone like Jeff Bezos, who's a trillionaire now, right? Why wasn't there a trillionaire 200 years ago? It's not because there wasn't $1 trillion in the world. It's because the economy has grown. There are more dollars, more and more every year. And there has to be more dollars all the time, or else the system will collapse on itself. That creates problems for capitalists, but it also creates problems for the poor, especially because when a country needs to expand, because the bourgeois class, the capitalist class there is having problems. One really easy way to do that is go invade another one. Go find some other people who you can maybe capture as a captive market, and you can sell all kinds of things there, or you can capture as a way to get cheap resources to make your manufacturing process easier, right? This is why Lenin famously says imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. It's the moment when a nation is compelled to expand in these political ways, and that creates all kinds of international exploitation. And every poor country that you can think of, Haiti, Venezuela, etc., all of them, they're all under the thumb of exactly this process.
It's also probably worth pointing out here too, the other reason that we want to care, especially within this exact situation that we're talking about right here, is that through this type of analysis, you can see that capitalism is it is big, it is ginormous, it is like a worldwide endeavor. It's also something that, like you said, Dean, it's like constantly growing and getting bigger. And it's also, I think it's good to say too, that it's like flexible, right? Like if you're not making money in one way, you just kind of figure a way to pivot your whole situation and you make money in a different way. And I think the flexibility of capitalism is actually really important to the understanding of it, because, well, I mean, for a few reasons. First, like you and your community sharing with one another, or you and your community comporting yourselves differently in the world to think about money differently or whatever, right? Fine, capitalism will find a different way to make money off of you. Like you'll still go to work somewhere and it'll still extract all of the labor it needs from you, and you'll still go to the grocery store and buy things. Like whether or not you might have this sort of different radical take on how you feel about money and Jesus and all this kind of stuff, but capitalism will just find different ways to profit from you and your community. And yeah, I mean, it's not something that you can't just challenge capitalism by like in a small way, right? It takes huge interventions to break these types of systems.
Yeah, there are no isolated islands in capitalism. Right. All right, that's enough of that. Let's turn to the labor power side, and I can finally stop talking.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk about labor and labor power. Okay, this is I don't have any good and fun stories that I've made up to illustrate this whole thing, but I'll just kind of tell you maybe a little bit about like what's going on with the labor side of things. So like Dean said, right, you're a capitalist, you're buying people's labor, you're buying their labor power, you're paying them for not their power, but their time. And isn't that all very interesting? So Marxism and like a lot of other leftist philosophical outlooks consider labor as something that's just really important, right? It's like it's central to understanding all society. Um, and Marx does it in this particular way that I think is, better than other people, but whatever. So anyways, how work gets done, how a worker's time is divided up, how they get paid, etc. All of these things are necessary for understanding the overall shape of a society. You want to know what a society looks like, you have to know how work gets done first. That's step one. So in Capital, Marx talks about this in sort of an abstract sense, in a big macroeconomic term, which he just calls labor power. So labor power, this is a quote from Marx. Labor power, however, becomes a reality only by its exercise. It sets itself in action only by working, but thereby a definite quantity of human muscle, nerve, and brain. So that's what labor power is, right? It's like it's the inaction of people in situations of production. Marx talks about it in Capital in this kind of very abstract way, and to me, personally, I mean, it's fine that he's done this, and it is helpful for like an understanding of Marxism. But I think that what makes labor and like labor power make sense to me is understanding the political texture it has to it. Otherwise, it's just like it's like, how many coats am I going to make? Which is great. You got to know about economics, I suppose. But like the political part is, I guess, where to me the rubber hits the road. So, for example, in the Communist Manifesto, of all places, Marx writes this about labor. He says the bourgeoisie, that's the ruling class, cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relation of society. So this is an important observation from Marx in the Communist Manifesto, because listen, you want, like I said, you want to know what your society looks like. You need to look at like the way that labor is done. But this is tricky because the way that labor gets done, the instruments of labor, the means of production, are constantly being revolutionized by the capitalist class to, become more flexible in production, or to churn out more commodities in a shorter amount of time with different amounts of labor power, or trying to universalize a machine to the human body. All of these things, right? These are really important things for labor. So I guess generally labor is how things get done in society, but Marx's analysis is helpful because it helps us understand like who's benefiting the most and who's benefiting the least, right? The capitalist class, by revolutionizing the instruments of production, is always going to be the one benefiting the most, because they're going to be finding ways to use that big labor power and extract as much of it as possible from people in manageable amounts of time, so they don't have to pay people too much. Or they'll reduce wages for different amounts of specialized labor and so on. So what labor looks like is really important, but what's crucial for Marx is that the organization of labor, that is, the organization of workers, people who don't own the means of production and can only have their labor to sell, and people who do own the means of production, the bourgeoisie, that organization of labor breeds certain types of class antagonisms. And this is where it gets exciting to me and to everybody. I mean, Dean got drew the short straw here, having to talk about like factories and stuff, and I'm going to talk about class antagonism. Yeah, so class antagonism or class warfare is the way Marx and Marxists talk about the violence inherent in political economy, and how like these two groups of people are always trying to kind of get one over on the other, but mostly, the people who own the means of production are the ones who are going to be winning in the end, at least for now. In another one of Marx's writings called The German Ideology, Marx does some like anthropological work and talks about what class antagonism and labor looked like in feudal societies and in like these sort of different historical epochs. I'm always like suspect of that part of Marx, because like so many more anthropological and sociological studies have been done since, and like feudal society is way more complicated than Marx parses out. Been reading a lot about sort of the enclosure of the commons and this transition from feudal to more industrialized capitalism. And boy, is it very complicated and interesting. All that to say, though, in capitalism, like class struggle is basically like the ongoing war between those who own the means of production and those who don't, right? That's class struggle. It's class struggle is it's your boss making sure that you clock in and out on time, that you don't clock in early, and that you're always working when you're at work and you're never slacking off or whatever, right? Class struggle is you and your friends, your coworkers at work, talking together like in the back in hushed tones, trying to figure out how you're gonna like stretch your paycheck to the next week, or how you could ask your boss for more sick time or something, right? This is what class struggle looks like on the ground. It also looks like way bigger too, right? At the level of legislation, where like huge corporations, like especially during the COVID-19 pandemic, right? Big corporations will end up getting millions, if not more, from the government, whereas actual workers will get nearly nothing, right? This is class struggle because the capitalist class, the bourgeoisie, they have all kinds of sway over legislators and whatnot, right? They have all the power in the situation. So based on these analyses of labor, like what it is, how it works, what it looks like, and class struggle, Marx comes up with a big theory of revolution where necessarily these antagonisms of capitalism will like resolve into socialism, into like an uprising. And it didn't. It didn't, but just the same, class struggle is playing out regardless of some kind of grand proletarian revolution. And regardless of that, I think that class struggle is still happening is proof that Marx is still helpful for understanding these like larger, like the ways that capitalism creates them, and like what workers can do to kind of like stop them. So I think we can talk about revolution maybe more in a minute, or not, I don't know. But all of this is helpful for Christians because, like, if you're interested in the least of these, if you're interested in people who are like we've been saying this entire time, who are like low wage workers, or people who are just like seem like they will spend their entire life in poverty, these are really important questions, because like the reason they're in poverty is because of the particular organization of labor, and also all kinds of other factors too, like white supremacy and heteronormativity and patriarchy and these kind of intersecting things, right? These are all important, but like if you're not kind of if you're not willing to get into the trenches here and think about the ways that these like people's lives are influenced materially by labor and other structures, like what are you even doing? So right, if you care about the least of these, if you care about not worshiping mammon, like labor is exactly what you should be thinking about, right? Like how can you get not even just in sort of a crass way of like we gotta repossess or appropriate Jeff Bezos' money, right? But like in the sort of like more Christian way too, right? Like how could you save the soul of your boss by like making them pay their workers more? How could you persuade Jeff Bezos to worship mammon less, by nationalizing Amazon or whatever? Yeah, I don't know. So like if you're a Christian and you care about poor people, then like God, get with it. Like live in a community with other people, share with people. These are all very good, but like show up on a picket line, advocate for higher pay, advocate for healthcare, advocate for like smashing the stupid system that keeps so many people in poverty and like will inevitably end up killing them early because it's just the way that it works.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is like something we don't have time to get into here, but it's something worth continuing to think about. Capitalism requires that some people are poor, right?
Necessarily so, yes.
Exactly. It needs some people to be unemployed. It needs certain rents to go up and down. All these kinds of bizarre things have to be present. The myth that capitalism could ever deliver equality is fundamentally flawed, because if it did, it would have big problems. It would have a crisis if there was equality. And just to maybe give one example, right? Unemployment. Economists, even capitalist economists, they agree and disagree on what level of unemployment is necessary to have a sort of healthy, flourishing society. The big irony here is it can never be zero. It always has to be, whether it's between 3 or 7 or whatever, how much the system can really actually contain, economists disagree about that, but they don't disagree that you need to have some unemployment. There's a number of reasons for that. One is because you've always got to have a labor market that's desperate to work. People have to be able to sell their labor for capitalists to buy it. Another is a labor movement will get too big if people aren't threatened with losing their job, right? Like, if you didn't have to worry about getting fired, then you probably wouldn't take the shit from your boss that you do, right? Mm-hmm. And so unemployment is a threat that the ruling class does use against the working class, but it's also a necessary feature of just how capital needs to reproduce itself. So again, there's tons and tons of ways that you could look at this. You could look at it in terms of housing. You can look at it in terms of other ways that people are poor. The point being, these are some very, very basic springboards from which you can start thinking about why are people poor, not just that people are poor.
Right.
Which is a big deal for Christians.
It should be.
Well, let's we're kind of getting over here, but I think it's important to at least end on the note of what you can do, and that's organizing. But organizing is also a phrase that just gets tossed around and might not mean that much. So what does Marxism do for you? I think maybe putting together what Matt and I have said here, right? You have, on the one hand, there's a capital side of this equation. On the other, there's a labor side of this equation. The capital side is clearly the most violent side. I think you can say they've got all the power and the money and the means, etc. But the labor side actually has a lot more potential power inside of it from a Marxist analysis, because it is the labor is the only commodity that can decide not to show up. That's one way of putting it, right? If there are crises in the chain of capital, it's one that can voluntarily quit. Workers, however, usually don't know that, right? Or they have legitimate fears that if they don't show up, if they cause trouble, they'll be out of a job. And then they'll have a harder time selling their labor to a new buyer if they have like a bad reputation, right? So there's all these reasons that people don't understand that actually there's loads and loads and loads of critical power tied to just whether or not they go to work. Unions are supposed to represent the working class and their interests. Sometimes they do it better than others. And actions like strikes are supposed to teach people that they do have power, even if the capitalist class has a ton of it too, right? So I think that's just one way that Marxism can help us figure out what to do. It's not just go to church, although, yeah, like go to church for sure. You should be a good person. You should be spiritually fed as you're doing all this organizing work, etc. And Christianity even offers some, I think, genuinely unique contributions to political struggle. It makes you a good comrade, hopefully, right? But at the end of the day, Marxism and asking the labor question in this way allows you to at least find out what you should do beyond just saying people should be a good person, which is what most of this kind of allegedly radical Christian rhetoric usually amounts to.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean, there's no reason that Christians can't get down with this whole thing, right? Like, historically, as our podcast is a testament to, Christians have been at the forefront of this kind of organizing. They still are. I got an email from my pastor just today about showing up to a strike on Wednesday. So that's pretty wild.
That's great.
Yeah, I know. Like, all I'm trying to say, I mean, I'm not trying to tell you about how good my pastor is, because I don't really care that much about that. But just saying that, like, people are still invested in these types of struggles. Christians are. And, like, I think it's good to give ourselves permission as Christians to, like, be agitators in our community, to, like, show up for these types of things, because yeah, I mean, like we discussed, right? Like, labor is the only commodity that can decide not to show up. That this is the place that, like, if you want to fight back against every bad thing in society, this is one place you can do it, where you can really put pressure on people. And that's really important. So yeah, I mean, like, the least of these aren't just passive recipients of charity or people who had bad luck or whatever, but they're part of a class of people that hasn't yet found a way to understand and exercise their power. But organizing labor and organizing, I think, a lot of other things too, like tenants and things like that, is a really good way to start expressing that power and exploring, like, what the extents of it are, right? Like, labor and, like, organized labor in the United States has been in the decline for a really long time, and it's only now kind of starting to pick up again. But I think that the more people that get involved and the more that we really press companies and our local governments and our federal government to like actually do something through direct action, like striking, the more results we'll see and the more power we find that we actually have in our society.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we've been ragging on Christians and maybe leaning into the Marxism side of this, but I think it's maybe just important to emphasize at the end here that there are Christian reasons to recognize that this is where the power lies in society, right? Christianity should shape you in particular ways, and it should make you want a world that is just and kind and, you know, one where people don't have to go needlessly hungry and starve and all that kind of thing. But if that's truly how you feel, if you really think that Jesus cares about social justice in a meaningful sense, then that means figuring out where the levers of power are. And they are not in Congress, by and large, right? They're not among legislators. They're also not just in church or in your local community. Again, all those things are other political pressure points, but they're not primary. I've been talking about David Harvey a bunch, but someone else I would mention here is actually Boots Riley, who is probably the reason that I'm a communist. If you don't know who he is a rapper and a filmmaker and just an all-around cool guy. But he gives a lot of interviews, and you should look them up. One thing that he constantly sort of says in every context is that demonstrations are named that way because they are a demonstration of power. If all these people who are marching decide not to go to work tomorrow, you're going to have a big problem on your hands. That's why they're named as such. And Boots Riley is always saying, if you think there's a problem in society, the one thing you can do to really threaten somebody is say, we're not going to go to work. For instance, he gives a lot of examples of like when Black Lives Matter people are protesting, when that movement is protesting obviously unjust verdicts, and, you know, trying to build real power. Boots Riley always says, well, if those movements, which are great and important and good, were accompanied by a militant labor class that would also add to that kind of critical mass, the threat that they wouldn't go to work, well, you'd probably have a very different constellation of power in society, right? It's not to say that racism would be solved by any stretch. That's not true, and not what Boots Riley is saying either. But you would be exercising a lever of power that is ultimately even more dangerous, I think, than, you know, burning a cop car, as important and cathartic as that might be. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to cast aspersions on that, whatever, do what you got to do. But all that to say, the activist component of this that I think Christians really have to wrestle with is that labor is where the power is in a capitalist society. And if Christians want capitalism to be tamed or whatever, changed, abolished, however you want to put it, if they want to be anti-capitalists, they have to figure out how that works.
Yeah, I think that's right. Thanks for listening to the Magnificast. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon, patreon.com/the Magnificast. We've also got some stuff on our Redbubble store. You can buy t-shirts or stickers, or you could not, and that's fine too. It's just whatever, you know? It's fine. I don't mind.
When we get our Bible Factory, though, you're going to have to buy some of those.
That's true. And we do get the Bible Factory. We're going to need you all to kind of come out for that. Cool. Well, our intro music is by Amari Armstrong, and the outro music is by The Illogical Spoon. And we'll see you next time, and we'll talk about linen and coats. Probably not, but there's always the possibility.
Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord. Jackson, keep your hoods up, well, you keep your hoods up, and you stay up late. In Jackson, you keep your hoods up, well, you keep your hoods up, and you stay up late. Oh, don't mind a cold night, but we might mind if you leave too soon. So come on now, it's still